No One Lives Forever 2 is a 2002 first-person shooter developed by Monolith. It is a direct sequel to the acclaimed No One Lives Forever. Now, the thing about the sequel is that in many ways it's a much better game than its predecessor. It looks and sounds better, featuring a stunning for its time presentation and a banger soundtrack by Nathan Grigg. In most cases the missions are more open-ended, allowing players to complete objectives in whichever order they desire. Failure upon detection missions are gone, with only a handful of objectives requiring complete stealth. And the humor is sharper than ever. One thing before we start. I will try my damnedest to avoid making too many comparisons between 1 and 2. Also, I'm fully aware that comparison is the lowest form of analysis or critique or whatever you want to call this video, but since I played them back to back and the memory of the first game is still fresh in my mind, not comparing them might prove a nearly impossible task. Okay, let's get this ball rolling.
Can we postpone this? Fine.
No One Lives Forever 2 picks up right where the last game left off. Kate, a former thief and a rookie spy in the first game, is now a well-respected field operative for Unity, an international secret organization dedicated to protecting humanity from all sorts of maniacs hell-bent on conquering the world. The game starts with Kate traveling to Japan, where she was to investigate a rumored criminal convention where all the hotshots were supposed to congregate. Her task is simple: snap a photo of the director of H.A.R.M and fuck off before anyone notices she's there. As it turned out, this whole thing was just an elaborate trap set up by the director, who was still bitter after Kate foiled his schemes in the first game. As Kate is about to make her escape from the village, she's ambushed and stabbed by Isako, the leader of a local band of ninjas who owes a life debt to the director. Cue the title screen, Kate wakes up in a hospital bed, blah blah, the director of Unity goes on vacation and leaves Bruno Lori, the temporary director of the agency, yada yada, hawkish American general ironically called Hawkins is a dumb sexist fuck, oh, and H.A.R.M have reformed and might be in cahoots with the Soviets. I'm leaving out a lot of details, but this is all you need to know about the premise. At least for now. So in many ways, No One Lives Forever 2 takes its spy theme even further by tapping into real-life geopolitical events. The sequel invests even more effort into exploring the finer and intertwined complexities of espionage and international politics. Of course, with a dash of the series' now famous satire. They didn't need to do this, but they made an effort anyway, which I totally respect. Before we get to the presentation, I want to address the opening of this game. I wouldn't be surprised if it made at least a dozen bad first impressions. It's not bad necessarily, but let's just say it doesn't do a great job of hooking players and hinting at what they can expect next. I've talked with several friends about No One Lives Forever 2, and half of them told me they checked out by the end of the first mission. And no matter how much I insisted that it gets better later on, I wasn't able to convince them. It's kinda like trying to recommend an excellent TV show with a slow first season. So here it is again. Please have patience beyond the tutorial mission. Trust me, it gets better. Alright, let's get to the presentation now. No One Lives Forever 2 is a huge step up in terms of presentation over its predecessor. Similar to the first game, No One Lives Forever 2 opts for a stylized visual representation of the 60s, seasoned with a slightly cartoonish character design. Monolith's decision to go for stylized graphics instead of realism lends the game with an almost timeless quality. This game is nearly 20 years old, but it doesn't feel as such. While the 60s element is not as pronounced as it was in the first game, it still feels distinctly retro, but in a different way. Psychedelic bars and mid-century interior design are nowhere to be found here. Instead, we are treated to brutalist Soviet industrial wastelands and the cramped streets of 60s Calcutta. But we'll talk more about the locations later. Speaking of timeless, the next part has nothing to do with the game's timelessness, I just suck at transitioning between paragraphs. With No One Lives Forever 2, Monolith have really upped their production values, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the cutscenes. We're talking facial expressions, a surprising variety of camera angles. Characters move and talk like real people instead of stay motionless, like things that stay motionless. Yeah, I don't know, it's clear that Monolith brought people with cinematic sensibilities to work on these cutscenes. I don't know anything about this stuff, okay? Who do you think I am, Eyebrow Cinema? Go watch his videos if you want in-depth essays on, I don't know, films and stuff. He made a really good set of videos about the James Bond franchise. I hope you appreciated the topicality of this shoutout. However, this increase in production quality came with a hidden cost. Cutscenes are much shorter this time around. Some people will applaud this, and understandably so, since some cutscenes from the original felt interminable. But I kinda enjoyed hearing Kate reciting 500 pages worth of background information from memory. Did it feel unrealistic? Sure. I can barely remember what I wrote in the previous paragraph. But it was one of those charming quirks that made No Lives Forever stand out. Plus, these cutscenes made for good palate cleansers between missions. On the subject of Kate Archer, you might have noticed that her design varies quite significantly from the original game. However, she doesn't only look different, she also sounds different. Kit Harris didn't reprise her role from No Lives Forever, and she was instead replaced by Jen Taylor, aka Zoe from Left 4 Dead and Cortana. Yes, that Cortana.
Damn it, that's not what I'm saying. I just want to be challenged. I'm sick of wiretaps. I'm sick of eavesdropping on boring strangers who may or may not pose some trivial threat to international security because they forgot to declare a ham sandwich in Heathrow. I don't have the patience for it. It's not what I'm good at.
That proposal we found was dated 1965.
And?
That means it was well underway during the Harm incident last year.
Just drop the Joan of Arc routine, okay? I've got a lot more field experience than you do.
I've read your file. Subtlety isn't really your specialty, is it?
I can be subtle.
Then explain that shirt.
Something's wrong.
I didn't realize I was in the company of a genius.
I've kicked your ass before, I can do it again.
So here's the thing. I think Jen Taylor did a great job bringing life to the sharp and witty operative that we all love. But I don't think it's too controversial to say that the Kate Archer from the first game and the Kate from the sequel may as well be different characters. Kate from 1 had this infectious upper-class English accent with a slight Scottish edge, which made her seem sophisticated and relatable at the same time. It gave the impression of a person who can mingle with aristocrats and grab a beer with regular people at a pub with just as much ease. A quality which, coincidentally, is very useful to a spy. Plus, it made her stand out from the stock, upper-class British spies that are so prevalent in pop culture. Kate from the sequel is... she veers more towards that stock character I just described. This is not to say I didn't like this version of Kate almost as much as the one from the original. She retained some of her edge across the two games, but I just don't find her as relatable on a personal level. Before we move on, let's address the elephant in the room. Being an unofficial remaster of sorts, No Lives Forever 2 comes with a set of issues that you kinda have to get used to. First, let's talk about the head bob. Generally, I'm all for it. I liked the strong sense of physicality it conferred to movement in Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, for example, but in this game it is nausea-inducing. Decreasing the amount of head bob in the settings menu solves the issue to some degree, but doing so reveals yet another problem. That problem being the frame rate. I could barely manage to keep it at a steady 50 frames per second, and only after fiddling with the settings one by one. It even dipped in the low 30s in certain moments, like when closing in on solid objects and for some bizarre reason in indoor areas. Halfway through the game, I realized that the reason I was feeling nauseous was not the head bob, rather the unstable frame rate and head bob, combined with the low FOV and some weird terrain collision micro glitches that caused Kate to move in this really unnatural manner that was basically visual kryptonite to my brain. It got better with time though. So there you have it. Now let's move on to the writing.
Welcome to the Manhandler, ARM's latest all-purpose death trap and automated torture device. Let's take a look at what today's victim has in store, shall we? Man Crate. That's right, folks. The victim is about to become a living block of human misery. The perfect punishment for all those naughty boys and girls who need a reminder of how completely and utterly insignificant they are.
The writing underwent a significant overhaul as well, but fortunately it was mostly for the good. If you've watched my review of the first game, you might remember that I praised it for its incredible world building and keen sense of place and time. I'm happy to report that No Lives Forever 2 not only matched the first game in this sense, but even surpassed it in a lot of ways. Let's start with the world building. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with this universe, No Lives Forever is set in a world where secret evil organizations are part of daily life. Like really, there's dozens of these groups. Being a criminal is a viable career path because these organizations often offer benefits and pensions and function like regular companies, and intelligence services are stretched thin and super spies are overworked because really, how the fuck can you compete with an international criminal organization that has a human resources and marketing department? This kind of structure is only possible in organizations with a certain level of ubiquitousness and staying power. And this layer of mundanity made H.A.R.M. both terrifying on an existential level and hilarious at the same time. The sequel not only matches the first game in this respect, but delves deeper into the rabbit hole by revealing the internal processes of these organizations in even more painstaking detail, if you can believe it. The 7th mission sees Kate traveling to India, where Evil Alliance, who were briefly mentioned in the first game, have one of their cells. There is a lot of lore concerning this organization, like how its leader is known as a notoriously indecisive criminal, one day hating the Americans and the next loving them and hating the Germans, and how it beat H.A.R.M. in the best logo design at the fucking Evil Academy Awards, and holy shit, how do you even come up with this stuff? But I'll stop here. Anyway, if you take the time to read all the intelligence pieces while infiltrating their HQ in India, you'll be treated with an absolutely delicious cavalcade of office politics and employee squabbles. There's a series of internal memos detailing a vicious tug-of-war between middle management and marketing over the former's insistence on changing the name of a certain operation, and the latter's refusal to do so due to fears of copyright infringement. I'll be honest with you, I felt more invested in this brief optional vignette than the mission itself, which speaks volumes about the quality of this game's writing. I spent a lot of time in my No One Lives Forever video talking about H.A.R.M, so I won't do it here. All I'll say is this: remember when they had their counterintelligence department fuck with Misery's water supply to win a corporate sports event? Well, this time around they commissioned a super secret submarine with a super advanced radar system just for the purposes of sneaking behind a US warship and welding profanities on its hull. Never change, H.A.R.M. Never change. As a side note, I really appreciate Monolith's attempt at establishing an expanded, connected universe across the two games. In Morocco, which Kate visits during the events of the first game, you can find a letter from a man addressed to his wife, Marta, in which he confessed to being a Soviet agent posing as an American in his wish to get back together with his first wife. This is not actually a letter per se, but a note he left behind in the hotel room that they shared while on fucking vacation in Morocco. But they end up staying together because his current wife probably didn't learn that on account of you picking up the letter. I'd forgotten about this event completely until very late into the second game, where I encountered Clark himself on a H.A.R.M. underwater base. Well, encountered is a polite way to put it. I actually killed him and discovered his identity after I found a letter on his body addressed to Marta, in which he informs her of his defection from the Soviet Union to H.A.R.M. and begs her to take him back. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many blink and you miss it callbacks to No One Lives Forever 1, but the game never pushes them in your face. I mentioned earlier in the video that with the sequel, the writers tapped even more into the real-life geopolitical tensions of the era to craft their spy satire. You may know that the Soviet Union was the main boogeyman of Western pop culture during the Cold War, especially in spy flicks, which often portrayed them as these larger-than-life incompetent buffoons. More often than not, there was no depth to them. The sequel does that as well, but reading between the lines and beyond all the gulag and borscht jokes unveils a keen understanding on the part of the writers on how these communist societies functioned, all the twisted social dynamics and the layers of bureaucracy that everybody, from the common soldier to the highest ranking military officer, had to deal with. It's clear that the writers did their homework, and as a person who lives in the former Eastern Bloc and still has to tackle with these archaic bullshit remnants of my country's former communist regime, I felt acknowledged. Before I forget, I have to mention a series of memos that tell the story of a group of Soviet dissidents that keep putting off their revolution for stupid reasons, like the weather being too cold. That's some funny shit. The last thing I want to touch on before talking about the gameplay concerns the enemy conversations. Now, this was a staple of the first game, so No One Lives Forever had some big boots to fill. So are they as funny and cleverly written as in the first game? Well, yes and no. It depends on your expectations, I guess. As much as it pains me to admit this, some of the enemy conversations in 1 were excessively long, so Monolith addressed that issue by making them shorter in No One Lives Forever 2. The problem is that they trimmed off the fat without adding enough substance. Like, okay, the ninja complaining about her overbearing ninja mother got a chuckle out of me, or the Soviet officer brazenly declaring that people don't just simply disappear for no reason in the Soviet Union. Hell, I even overheard the surprisingly insightful debate between 2 goons on the reasons why women don't join criminal organizations. But they're not goons discussing the systemic issues that push people into criminal lives, or goons talking about starting an experimental jazz band in their off time good, you know? I feel like No One Lives Forever 2 lost some of its charm by not focusing as much on these environmental conversations.
Diary of Tom Goodman, Volume 5, December 9th, 1965. A breakthrough at last. She wasn't good looking and she smelled like a horse, but she was woman enough for me. The last obstacle to my success as a super spy has been conquered. As of today, I am no longer a virgin. Yee-haw!
In terms of gameplay, the sequel adopts the formula established by its predecessor and takes it to the next level. At its core, it's a story-driven first-person shooter/stealth hybrid with a linear mission-to-mission structure. Now, does No One Lives Forever 2 excel in both departments? No. Fuck no. But it's definitely superior to the first game in both areas. The shooter elements are definitely tighter and better implemented this time around. When it comes to shooters, I generally care more about how the weapons feel to use and sound than, say, their variety. If you give me just 3 weapons but they have great sound mixing and animations, I'm happy. The sequel kinda falls in that category in the sense that while it doesn't excel in the weapon variety department, the weapons that players get feel amazing. Ammunition types are also back. And the game also introduces more exotic weapons like katanas and shurikens, but they make only brief appearances during certain missions, which is a shame. If I were to complain about one weapon, that would be the silenced pistol. You may already know from my other videos that I have a thing for silenced pistols. Give me one and I'll do my best to beat the game with it. Here it feels like a toy gun. It lacks the punch and sense of physical momentum of the one from the first game. As expected, Kate's arsenal of spy gadgets from the first game makes a glorious return, this time with a new coat of paint and a few tweaks to make them more intuitive to use. A few notable examples are a spray can that doubles as a blowtorch, an acid ejecting perfume that dissolves bodies, a decoder masked as a makeup case, and others that I'll let you discover by yourself. An important thing to note here is that the gadgets are activated contextually by holding the action button, so you don't have to manually select them anymore, which is such a nice quality of life feature that saves a lot of time. On the subject of stealth, it's obvious that Monolith listened to player feedback and did their best to improve the stealth mechanics from the original. To name just a few, they introduced more stealth-oriented gadgets such as sleep darts and tracking darts. Camera disablers can be shot from an utility gun instead of manually attaching them to security cameras. Bodies can be picked up and stored out of sight. There's a light indicator that pops up whenever you slide into one of the game's predetermined hiding places. You can lean around walls, and let's not forget about bear traps.
Help me get this thing off!
Overall, the level design is much more stealth-friendly. Levels are semi-open-ended and allow for a decent amount of freedom of movement. In most cases, there is more than one way to infiltrate a building or reach a target. Don't expect something on the same level as, say, Deus Ex, but I still think Monolith's attempt to not restrict players is laudable. Before you check out of this video and go to the game hoping to roleplay as the sneakiest and shrewdest spy since George Smiley, allow me to quickly dismantle all the improvements I have just mentioned. First, there's absolutely no purpose to playing non-lethally. Why? For one, enemies wake up eventually, so unless you make sure to disarm them and drag their bodies as far away from the spot they got knocked out as possible, they'll start running and alerting their buddies to your presence. Okay, then how about just eating them, but like quietly? I mean, you could do that, but I don't recommend it for two major reasons. Remember when I said that No One Lives Forever 2 contains only a few objectives that require complete stealth as opposed to the original? Well, to counter this, the sequel utilizes respawning enemies much more frequently than the first game. So if you're like me and like to plan out your every move and systematically clear up maps of enemies one by one until there's nobody left and the whole place basically becomes your domain, well, I have some bad news for you, bucko. Another aspect that makes stealth in this game an uphill battle is the AI. It's designed with the so-called goal-oriented action planning architecture, which basically means that enemies have more control over their actions. So, I won't pretend I'm an expert on AI design or that my brain is capable of comprehending even 1% of what's being explained in this PDF detailing this system, and please let me know if I'm tripping here, and I apologize in advance to the AI engineers watching this video, but why would you utilize an AI architecture that confers enemies with autonomous decision making in a stealth game? Like, from my limited knowledge, I was under the impression that AI in stealth games is not supposed to be necessarily smart, rather designed in such a way that it creates the illusion of intelligence, while at the same time following predictable rules that players can intuitively internalize. Right? Like, that's why enemies in Dishonored never look up, because 1, that would make blink pointless, and 2, it would effectively nullify the verticality of the level design. So you can probably understand my dilemma here. The AI in No One Lives Forever 2 is competent, at least on a fundamental level. It reacts to a wide variety of stimuli and environmental factors, but it's just not suited to stealth because it doesn't follow a predetermined set of predictable rules, and the game doesn't make an effort to explain them, or at least telegraph them in some way. I'm gonna level with you, I don't have the experience or even the vocabulary to elaborate on why it doesn't work beyond just plainly stating that it doesn't work and that stealth is just not worth it in most cases. Which is sad because No One Lives Forever 2 has the template, the foundation of a decent stealth game. It's just that it pales in comparison to the shooting, which is way more enjoyable. I'd even go as far as to say that with a little tweaking to its systems, it could make for a decent immersive sim. Just imagine if Arcane got their hands on this IP, like holy fuck. Now, all that's left to talk about are the missions and locations. I don't want to spoil too much, but what I can say is that Monolith definitely amplified the crazy factor to 100 in No One Lives Forever 2. The first mission takes place in Siberia, pretty typical of a spy flick. You kill Soviets, collect intelligence, blow up infrastructure, you know, the usual stuff. Then the campaign delves even deeper into the minutiae of spycraft by sending Kate to the suburbs of Akron, Ohio. Her mission is not to intimidate the Black Keys into making good music again, but to investigate an abandoned building that was used as a safe house by a former Unity traitor. And that's it. Actually, that's not it, because soon after that, Kate finds herself fighting ninjas in the streets of Akron in the midst of a fucking tornado. I'm not done yet. She then pursues their leader into a trailer, and as they're sparring with katanas, the trailer gets picked up by a tornado. Do they stop fighting and maybe try to find a way to make it out of this ridiculous situation alive? Fuck no, they continue brawling while the trailer gradually disintegrates. This is batshit insane, and this is just one level. So to summarize No One Lives Forever 2's gameplay, the most accurate way to describe it would be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's still an enjoyable game to play, don't get me wrong, but I feel that the game might have needed a few more months or even a year of polish and testing to flesh out the stealth mechanics. As a shooter, it's great, so don't feel bad if you get frustrated by the stealth and go on the occasional massacre, or even if you ignore stealth completely. One more thing before we wrap up. I know it's unusual for me to be so negative, but trust me when I say that I loved No One Lives Forever 2, and I'm doing this out of... I don't even know at this point. As of writing the script, the series is still in copyright hell and there's a pretty high chance that we'll never get a sequel, so raising awareness about this unique franchise might seem like a pointless exercise. Let's be honest, it's not like Activision or whoever the fuck owns the rights at this point will watch this video and go, holy hell, that Mark guy sure has a point. Let's pass the torch to a studio that actually wants to do something with this IP. And I think I know why I've been so negative. It has nothing to do with the game itself. The game's great. I'm not upset at the game because of its flaws. I'm bitter and disappointed that it never got the chance to fix them in a sequel thanks to these copyright hoarding corporations that latch onto these nostalgic IPs like ticks on barn animals. Or dragons on their piles of treasure, and other forced analogies. Consequently, my latest playthrough of No One Lives Forever 2 was marked by a bitter sense of premature finality. The last time hearing Kate and Angus banter, the last time I'm hearing H.A.R.M goons talking nonsense while they should be out causing mayhem, the last time I went on a globe-trotting, hilarious, over-the-top spy adventure that, despite its ridiculousness and knack for the absurd, it doesn't mock its source material but embraces all of its cliches and tropes and lovingly pokes fun at them. I'm sad we'll most likely never see it continued, but at least we have the 2 games to enjoy and nobody can take them away from us. Hopefully. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.